6,000 things, and there's no way you can do like one talk on all of them. There are several ways that Vault can store its data in several different types of backends. It can do it in S3, it can do it in DynamoDB, Console, etcd, and about 20 others. Some of the backends can be used for HA. So like etcd can be used for HA, and one of the operators will see it. DynamoDB can be used for HA. Console can be used for HA. S3 is not HA. How it works is when Vault starts up, if you want to set it up in HA mode, it uses its backend to elect the leader. It's using some sort of lock process. I've only ever used HA with the console backend, but it's supposed to work with DynamoDB and various others. And when you look at the list of available backends, it'll say this one's HA ready and this one's not, or whatever the case may be. One thing it can do is dynamic secrets and passwords. One part of the demo will be we'll create a dynamic password for MySQL that only lasts for a certain amount of time, and then the password goes away. It can be there are a bunch of database backends this can be used for: MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, and a bunch of other DBs. It can be used for cloud account access, like Alibaba, AWS. You can use it to issue like the AWS access and secret keys that are very short-lived and stuff like that. When a secret is created, there's a TTL on every one, and how big the TTL is sort of depends on. There's sort of like a cascading set of permissions. So there's like this big major policy, but then you create policies under that, and you say, oh, everything created under this policy can only have a max TTL of 2 hours. If you inherit from that policy, you can set a TTL up to 2 hours or anything less than that, 5 minutes or, whatever it is. It can be used for PKI, for public key infrastructure. I was hoping to get part of that into the demo, but I ran out of time because I was not here this weekend. I was mountain biking. Another thing it can do is, and this I sort of talked about with dynamic secrets and passwords, but each password has, like I said, each password or secret has a TTL, can have a TTL on it, and Vault can renew those TTLs or revoke the secrets or whatever. How does it work? There are many different ways you can do this. Well, basically, how it worked at the beginning, and I meant to say I'm only going to go over the OSS version. There is an enterprise version that does at least two extra things that we'll see on the UI. It has names. The enterprise version has namespaces and something else. I can't remember what it is. How it worked originally, there's an algorithm called Shamir's secret sharing algorithm. It's pretty neat. If you look it up it's some sort of polynomial function thing that if you're really geeky into math, you'll enjoy it. If you're not, you'll just your eyes will just glaze over. But we'll see it how it's used to seal and to unseal the vault. Basically, in this case, what you'll get is when you initialize the vault, you'll get 5 keys by default, and you can use 3 of those keys to unlock it. So that's the default setting. And you can change these numbers when you initialize the vault. You can say, give me 8 keys and be able to unlock with 2, or whatever the case may be. The purpose behind that is you're supposed to distribute the keys between different people. So in theory, if you want to be ultra secure, one of the ways is no one person has all the keys to unlock it. If you want to set it up that way, you don't have to if you don't want to. It sort of depends upon what level of secrecy and security you want. That's one of the ways. sealed and unsealed, I'll sort of go over when we do the demo and what to do when things go bad. There are multiple other ways to unseal a vault. The most secure way is a hardware security module, and it can use AWS's HSM, and there are a couple others it can use, and I believe that's only supported in the enterprise version. That's for like ultra tip-top security. It's what the financial institutions use and stuff like that. Clients can interact in multiple ways with Vault. You can either do, and you'll see some commands in the demo. There's an HTTP, there's a REST API, there's a Vault client, there's a Vault UI, or there's a website, or web UI for it. Like I said before, decrypted data is never written to disk, and I already went over a lot of the storage backends. And I should also say, if anybody has any questions, just speak up, because I'll just keep talking. So, why would you want it? There are a couple reasons, or there are many reasons more than this. Keep your secrets secret. One of the things about, and this is a question I would have for you guys, at least with Kubernetes previous to 1.13, actual Kubernetes secrets were not secret. They're base 64 encoded. I think with 1.13 you can turn it on with an API, with an API server flag. I haven't messed with that yet. I haven't tried to do it. That's one of the reasons. But if you can do that with Kubernetes, that keeps your secrets secret. That's fine. But Vault does a bunch of other things, like I said before. It can generate passwords. It can generate access keys that are very short-lived and they'll go away. It can generate SSL certs on the fly, and way too many other things to list here. But those are, and we can go, and when I show the UI, the UI will show most of the things it can do. It can encrypt on the fly, and stuff like that. So we'll worry about that later. Why on Kubernetes? It's like, well, everything should be on Kubernetes. Not really, but a lot of people seem to want everything on Kubernetes. Another reason is, and something I just tried to get working, you can run with these operators. I only tried it with one of them. I got it working, but with these operators, you can run multiple Vault clusters on Kubernetes. So if you need separation for some reason, that the enterprise namespaces would provide, but you don't want to pay for enterprise, you can create, the support group has a Vault cluster, the devs have a Vault cluster, and stuff like that. And it's just Kubernetes. It's just a couple pods, depending upon how you choose to store it, or which backend you choose. You can get HA without paying for extra instances. Depending upon how much traffic you're doing, like most of the clients we've worked with before, the Vault is very low traffic. It was used for storing config information, or just generating passwords every once in a while, and then, and then when, it's doing a request every 5 seconds. It's just not very high traffic. Some companies, this may not be appropriate for it. I know there are a couple companies out there doing 20 or 30,000 queries per second to Vault. Probably not appropriate to put that on Kubernetes. But most people, at least in our use cases, they don't really need that much. And a nice thing about operators is, did I just say this? Like you said, you can run multiple clusters on there. This is one of the nice things about Vault. What happens if everything goes kablooey? Individual secrets can be revoked if you know one got out and the TTL is not up yet. You can go in there and revoke it. If everything has gone to crap, you can seal the entire Vault, and then all of a sudden Vault won't work, it won't issue secrets, won't issue passwords, you can't get any information out of it. Then to unseal it, you either, depending upon the unseal process, you may need to get 3 or 4 guys together with their keys to unseal it. The backends, I've done this with console, but I'm pretty sure with other backends you can do it as well. Just back up and restore if you need to. There's not a. I had it going with console, and there's not really a huge worry because everything, like I said, I think that's my crutch. Like I said, if everything stored in the back end is encrypted, so Vault, and only Vault has the keys to undo it. So storing it in an encrypted S3 bucket or something for backup is not. It shouldn't be a huge problem. Why would you use an operator? Well, the operators can do most of the work for you. I had to write some Terraform to set it up for a client, and that took me a while. But with this Vault, with the operators, as soon as I had a Kubernetes cluster, there was some basic infrastructure I've had to set up beforehand for this demo, like an S3 bucket and a KMS key, but that was pretty much it. On MySQL for the DB part. They'll do a lot of the work. The CoreOS Vault operator, and I think both of them will actually, if you can install the etcd operator as well, and that will be there. So when you start up a cluster, the etcd operator will say, "Oh, I need an etcd cluster." It'll start that up first, then it'll start Vault, and then do its Vault thing, talk to etcd, and do whatever it needs. So in some cases, it automatically configures some things. The one thing I thought it automatically configured completely didn't work earlier today, so I'll at least talk about it, but I won't be showing it. And you can have multiple Vault clusters on a single Kubernetes cluster if you want. All right, now I'm going to get to the demo.
Hey, James, you asked a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Who maintains this?
The question is, who maintains Vault? Vault is a HashiCorp product. They're a company out of San Francisco. For a lot of their stuff, they have an OSS. For a couple other things, they have an open source version and an enterprise version. So they do Terraform. They wrote Terraform, Console, Packer, Nomad, and a couple other things I'd have to look on their website to do. Nomad is like Kubernetes. It's a cluster scheduler. Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool. There's a Terraform Enterprise and stuff like that, and they do a couple other things. And Packer I think was like one of the first things they wrote when they were in college, and that build AMIs, Google images, all sorts of things. So.
They do Vagrant too.
Yes, they do. Sorry, I forgot about that one. But yeah, they do. They're very heavy in the open source. Like pretty much all their products have an open. I think, yeah, except for one called Sentinel, all their products have an open source version. Sentinel is a policy enforcer sort of deal. I've never had a chance to use it, but so there's GitHub. There's GitHub for all these projects. If you ever want to take a look at them, stuff like that. So. I'm not used to this keyboard. So I'm going to be switching a little bit back and forth here because I have a little script to read and run from. Can you guys read the font and stuff? Is that okay? Yeah, I may have to adjust that for the terminal as well. But so the first operator we're going to go over is there's a CoreOS operator. CoreOS actually wrote the operator, the idea of an operator. They developed it, stuff like that. They use it for etcd, I think was the first one they did. But they have a Vault operator. That's the first one I'm going to demo. It's actually just as an aside, there's a whole backend for all of this that I had to use Terraform to create. It's sitting there. There's a Kubernetes cluster, an S3 bucket, a KMS key. I think there might be a DynamoDB table. I knew all this before the meeting was supposed to happen last time, and I've forgotten it since then. So,
I have a question.
yeah.
I don't know if you explained it already, but what's a KMS key?
The question is, what's a KMS key? What does it stand for? I think KMS stands for Key Management System. So for like the major cloud operators like AWS, GCP, Azure, and Alibaba have a key management system. Did I say that?
Okay.
You can generate a KMS key for security purposes. I've only ever used them for this particular case right here. I think with Amazon you can use a KMS key. You can generate a KMS key and encrypt your S3 buckets with that key, with one you create. If you don't create one, it's encrypted still, but it uses some KMS key that they generate, I think. I'm not really too familiar with how exactly they work, but it's a service. And I think I can show them to you on the AWS UI. So the first thing we're going to do is install the core OS operator. So I'm just going to switch back and forth here. Make sure we're all good. So cluster running. This is going to install the operator. Gives you a bunch of output. In this case, I'm telling it to install the etcd operator as well. Okay, it says it's going, and then actually let's look at the CRD so you guys sort of know what's going on. I made it too big. Where did there we go. And this one's pretty simple. This example is pretty simple. There's not much in here. It's just launching a Vault service. I gave it a name and I gave it a version. This version is actually pretty old. I think they're up to 1.1 now, or maybe 1.3. I can't remember. There's really not too much special in here. Now that I've started that, it'll start at the etcd cluster, and this takes a few minutes, and then it will start up the Vault cluster. And so this would actually be a good time to ask questions. Or
You said SCT, you're installing that. Is there any other requirements to Vault?
The question is, are there any other requirements to Vault? The only real requirement is the backend. Yeah, it's just a backend to store all its data, or to use for electing the leader when it's in HA mode. So, and you can actually do, if you want to, you can have the backend store be like S3. But then you can also set it up so that DynamoDB is used for leadership election. So it stores the data in S3, but it talks to DynamoDB and it gets in HA that way. So it elects who the leader is.
So is there any communication between the Vault pods? It's using a database. So the pods are using the database to talk to each other. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the question is basically is the Vault talking to a database?
Yeah, for the leader election.
For the leader election, yeah. From what I understand, for the leader election, it talks to console. Console has this built in because they use it a lot I believe they use it in Nomad as well. If you use a console backend for Nomad, there's some locking operations that can create a lock and say, oh yeah. so and so is the leader, and it's I think it's the SERF protocol, SERF, that they're heavily involved in, or they wrote a version of, they wrote an implementation of the SERF protocol. I can't remember if they actually wrote it or devised it or built it.
You said that it keeps keys strictly in memory only, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Is there a scenario where, like, if let's say the process fails or you hit some type of exception or something and it dies, and it will dump it to? You said you can back up the vault though,
Mhm.
like the disk will be backup. When's the scenario that it writes to disk those keys,
Um,
or does it just not?
it doesn't. It only writes the encrypted stuff
Gotcha.
to its backend.
Okay.
Well, and depending upon the backend, it could be stored in disk, or I think you can set some of the backends just to store them completely in memory, if you wanted to do that. But it's a good example. If the vault process dies, if you're in HA mode, it'll switch over to the other one. One of the things the enterprise version does is, in the open source version, you can have, it's an active passive sort of setup. There's one active leader that takes all the reads, all the writes, and then there's a backup. Or you can have multiple backups, even in the open source version. So you could have one active and 4 standby. And if the active one dies, I timed this once, it's like maybe 30 or 45 seconds before the second, up to 30 or 45 seconds before the second one is elected, depending upon latency or whatever, or where the network is. And I just realized you asked a question and I didn't repeat it, but too late now. So in the OSS version, if you're HA, if the vault process dies, part of the process, especially if you have multiple nodes, you have to unseal each one by hand with some of the setups, with some of the unseal setups. If you're doing it with HSM or the auto unseal process that it has, they'll unseal themselves automatically. The auto unseal is awesome. I love it. They announced it for the open source version. They had it in the enterprise version, and that was like the one thing everybody asked for in the open source version was auto unsealing. There are hacks, and I'll show you one. One of the operators has sort of a hacky way to unseal, to do it. And but anyway, when the vault process dies, it automatically goes over to a standby one that is unsealed, I believe. In the enterprise version, there's a way to have read backups. So all the writes will go to the master. All the writes are handled by the master, but you can have like readers, secondary readers that you can read from. You just can't write to. What happens in that case if you try to write to one, it redirects you to the active one, I believe. I'm not quite sure exactly how it does it behind a load balancer, or if it just sends the request over to the active and has the active do the work. I can't remember. I can't afford the enterprise version, so.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I had a question. And I'm sorry if you already answered this, but why would a vault become sealed?
The question is, why would a vault become sealed? The vault instance could be sealed for a couple reasons. It just started up, and it hasn't been unsealed, or become sealed. So that means it was sealed before. One of the reasons it could become sealed is if you seal it. If something went wrong, or access got out somehow, and the first thing you want to do, if someone gets access to your vault, the first thing you probably want to do is seal it. Depending. Another thing the vault does that I don't really go over is it has ACLs for even in the open source version. So ideally, most people would have less than admin access to it, or they would have only access to certain key stores or something along those lines. You can't. I don't think you can seal like just like a particular key store. You seal the whole thing or not. And that sort of brings me off on another tangent. There are multiple ways to authenticate with it, and you'll see when we load up the UI. We've set it up to use LDAP. It can use OAuth. It can use keys. It can use username and password if you want to do that. So that's it.
If you had, let's say, multiple accounts, and you're gonna retire one, but you weren't 100% sure that management was gonna change their mind, might you also seal it so that later you could unseal it if need be, but not have to worry about security issues?
You mean like sealing a particular user's account?
No, like, so let's say you have 5 accounts, and there's one of them's this weird dev environment that you're just trying stuff out of a whole Kubernetes cluster, whole account somewhere, and you're retiring that account. But
Oh, you
weren't
mean like AWS accounts?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
Google accounts or whatever. I'm not really quite sure how to say that succinctly back into the mic, but how do you, the question is like if you have multiple cloud accounts and you're working on multiple cloud accounts, how could you prevent it? Like seal off one account if you want to. Is that sort of
Yeah, like, so you're like, I'm retiring this, but it might come back.
how it deal like, for AWS at least? And this isn't really mentioned in here, but so the Vault nodes, and the way I set it up, the way I set this particular demo up, the actual Kubernetes worker nodes have IAM roles on them that allow them to do the things that we're doing. In here, one thing I should have said at the very beginning, this is not the most secure setup, this is not a production setup, you know, caveat. So you'll have, ideally with the Kubernetes setup, you probably use something like kube to IAM, or there's a new one called KIAM, I think, that gives IAM permissions to specific pods. So if you wanted to, like, oh, I don't want this vault to be able to work in this account anymore, you'd modify the IAM role that it was using. At least that's what I just made up, what I think. And it's the same sort of deal if you were just running as VMs. They'd have the IAM role. You just modify the IAM role, and it could no longer do it. I think there's also a way, which I haven't really experimented with yet. The thing that does, when Kubernetes starts up, when a Kubernetes pod starts up, it can get a token. I sort of know how it works with AWS and VMs. With AWS, so I'll just go over that. It's very similar for Kubernetes. However, there's public and private key stuff, and whenever I think about that, my brain starts freaking out. So, I believe how it works with AWS is in the instance metadata for an EC2 instance, there's a public or private key. I can't remember which one that you can get access to. On the node, you can get it, and you can sign a message that says, do this, that, or the other thing. And then there's a way for AWS to authenticate, this is an AWS instance. So Kubernetes sort of works the same way. If you have the proper policies set in Vault, so the instance starts up, or the Kubernetes pod starts up, this is the problem I was having. It gets a token, and you can use that token to authenticate with Vault automatically. You don't have to have a username or anything set up for it. So I just went off on a tangent. That was totally irrelevant to your question, but it's one of the neat little tricks that Vault can do, and you don't have to. There's nothing special there's nothing real special too much that you have to do to get an instance to authenticate and talk to Vault and get what it needs.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah.
could this demo run entirely on your local machine using like Minikube or something like that? Or is there something magical about doing it on a cloud provider?
No, there's nothing magical about it. Just as So the question is, can we run this? Could we run this demo on our local machine? At least with this first one, the Core OS one, you could, because it's just starting. Everything's in the cluster. Everything's in the Kubernetes cluster. There's nothing. It's not using S3 or DynamoDB or KMS or anything like that. So that is up. So I'm going to show you guys how to. So we've got the Vault instance running. You see it here. It's this one right up here. We need to unseal it. So first we're going to port forward to it. You could put these behind load balancers and stuff like that if you want to, but for demo purposes, I didn't really see much reason to. So, and ideally, that's how you would run it. You would run it behind a load balancer, probably a network one. So we're forwarding the port, and this is like the old way to unseal. This is the original way to unseal. And you'll see it. These are just settings. I'll be running the Vault client on my laptop, talking to the cluster. So the first thing you do, and actually, even though this says Vault operator in it, this is not a Kubernetes operator. This is just the command. So when you do that, when you initialize the Vault with, if you're using Shamir's algorithm, you'll get 5 unseal keys and you'll get a root token. Excuse me. The unseal keys are used to unseal the Vault. The root token, is used to log in. Ideally, what you do is unseal it, log in with the root token, create an admin user, or in some way, whichever, and configure it for configure the authentication, LDAP or whatever it is, and then you delete the root token, because the root token is just like sudo. It gives you admin access to everything. So you just you delete the root token. If you need a root token again, you can regenerate it with the unseal keys, but it's best to just not have a root token out there lying around. Just get rid of it as soon as you can. Just make sure you create the proper users, or you'll just be regenerating it. So now we unseal the Vault, and we have to do this 3 times. And something you'll see is in the output here is it'll tell you how many times. It says unseal progress. So right now it's telling us it's got 1 unseal key. It needs 2 more. So we just hit that a couple times. You cannot use the same key all 3 times. Tried that just for the heck of it. It does not work. And one thing you'll see, now that we've got all 3 keys in here, it'll say HA. In this case, it's HA. It's HA enabled. There's only 1 node for it, so not really HA. But if we started up 2 pods, it would be HA. Then I would have to unseal the other pod. One of them would decide which one's active, and then you would go from there. But you'll see in the output here, HA enabled is true. Give you the address for the cluster from within Kubernetes in this case, and then say HA mode is active. So you can see the Vault has a status thing. It just prints out what we just saw. But that's a good way to check what's going on.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
When you're running Vault operator, is Vault operator, is that anything to do with the Core OS operator, or is that?
The question is whether the Vault operator command has anything to do with any of the actual Kubernetes operators. No. Okay. I didn't really realize this until I was looking at it today, and I was like, that could be somewhat confusing. It used to be, in this case, Vault operator init, Vault operator unseal are operation commands for Vault. Okay. It has absolutely, in this case, it has absolutely nothing to do with a Kubernetes operator.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I mean, it's just going through the route or the load balancer or whatever.
Yeah. So I did vault status. Okay, so log in. So I'll just log in here. In this case, I will log in with the root token, which you're never supposed to do. Well, you have to do it at first to configure it, but bad juju if you generally do it again. And in this case, you are root. Your token duration is infinite, and you have access to everything. I think that was pretty much it. Oh, actually, one thing I figured out today is I was going to install a second vault. See what happens here. This is a second CRD. It creates a second one. This is just something I figured out. It was kind of cool. I thought it was kind of cool. So it'll eventually, in this case, it'll create. Let's talk to the operator. It'll create a second etcd cluster with the operator. Then it'll create a second vault operator in a few minutes. And then I'm just going to show. We'll see. If I run a vault status now, it's talking to the original one. It's unsealed. Fine, it's good to go. And when this works, I'm just going to use this to show. Oh crap! Can we forward yet? And one thing you'll notice with, if you see in here, these right here are the two vault instances running. One is the one we were playing with. One is the one I just created. There are two containers in the pod. The 2 of 2 is the one we started first and unsealed. One of the nice things about the operator sets up the readiness check, the liveness probes, and stuff like that. The second one here you're seeing ready is 1 of 2. Can't remember what the other container is in here, but the one container that's not running or is not successful is the vault one because it hasn't been unsealed. If a vault node is not, I can't remember what a standby returns. It's something in the 200, but it's not. It's like 201 or 202, but it's not 200. So when you're setting it up behind a load balancer, you just have it check for 200 for healthy, and it'll send traffic to that one.
Is it ever timeout, or is the Linus probe just going to run forever? And it will
I've never tried. It could just run forever. I don't know if it'll actually. I don't know if it'll actually terminate it if it doesn't start up. But at least with this, I could check the timeouts that they're in the. They're in there somewhere. I saw them, but I would suspect in this case you don't want it to die.
Yeah.
Because it may not be. If you have multiple nodes running or pods running in this case, you don't want it to die because you want it to be ready for HA.
And I think I missed earlier, when you run the vault commands, you're running those on your laptop. How are you pointing it to the vault cluster?
In this case, I'm using the port forwarding.
Oh, okay, I missed that. Okay, yeah. I saw 127001. I was like, that's not.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, in this case, I'm using port forwarding in a production setup, in a production environment, it would be behind a load balancer. And then, actually, that's how you would talk to it. That's not how you would unseal it. Because the load balancer, they won't be healthy behind the load balancer until someone unseals them, I think.
Because it wouldn't be ready.
Yeah. And I should. And that should actually fail because it's talking to the new vault that hasn't been unsealed yet. I could unseal it, but you've already seen that, so we don't need to do that again. So I'm just going to delete these. operators and start with a new one. There's another vault operator that I seems to have more options called Bonds. There's a cloud provider called Banzai Cloud, I think, and they're a small one. They're a small cloud operator. Oh no, sorry, Banzai Cloud. They do. I think they do CI/CD. They have CI/CD pipelines in the cloud, and they use Kubernetes for that. But I'll just delete the old operator. Just, so this was the more interesting one. Let me start it up, and then we'll see the CRDs for it. So in this case, it's just. In this case, for this one, I am using an S3 bucket as the storage backend, and there's a KMS key involved that they uses for unsealing. But let's look at. Got to set it up for. And this is the KMS key ID. It's not the key itself, but we use that. We tell it in here. So this is the CRD for that I'm setting up for the Banzai for this operator here. Let me just change the key here, and then we'll go over what each thing does. That basically tells it what KMS key to use. So you tell it the vault image to use, the bank vaults image. Banzai Cloud has something called bank vaults. There's a third container in there. I can't remember exactly what it does, but I think it's sort of like a caching thing that allows the pod, things in the pod, to talk to Kubernetes or Vault without doing much of anything. I could put the IAM roles in there, but that's not necessary. The unseal config, this particular configuration is unique to the Banzai Cloud operator. This is their hacky way of automatically unsealing with Shamir's algorithm. And I'll show that to you in just a second. The service account is just a service account I created. Everything is running under it. The config here is the Vault config. When you start up, if you start up Vault by hand, there's a config.htcl file where you put all its config information. That's basically it right here. Setting up the storage, S3 backend, setting up a listener. I'm not quite sure where those certs come from. I think the operator generates them. The API address, statsd, and UI is true, which will start the UI, which we'll see. External configs is external configs is Vault configuration that you would normally do through the Vault CLI, but you put that in this. Sorry, you can't see me pointing at the screen. This section right here, it basically, from what I understand, the Vault the operator basically takes this and applies these configurations to Vault. So the two things it's doing, it's creating an allow secrets policy for the secret path, and you'll see this. We'll see this in the UI. Is CRUD and list. And the other thing it's doing is creating a Kubernetes authorization setup. This is the part I couldn't get to work to do it automatically. This is the part where it allows the other Kubernetes pods to automatically authenticate with Vault with their token that Kubernetes gives them. So people don't have to. You don't have to go and give them a password or username or anything like that.
Is there any risk having that unencrypted?
This part right here.
Yeah, I mean, I know you can't encrypt a CRD, but like, what's the risk in having all this just out there for anyone that has access to the cluster? To see?
Knowing what your policies are is probably, if someone knows what your policies are, that's I would call that a little bit of a risk at least, because then they'll know which policy they'll try and get to. It doesn't necessarily have to. You don't necessarily have to put this in here. You can, after the vault is unsealed and ready to go, you can do this stuff with the CLI in a different way. Yeah, so. And then, of course, you script it, and then you put the script in Git, and then it's the same thing. So,
Yeah,
but
same problem over again.
yeah, and there are. You could probably put it in an encrypted S3 bucket as well. Put the scripts in there or the commands in there if you wanted to. Never really worried about it too much. Like I said, most of the clients we had are using it to store config information, which is not really. Like database passwords and stuff like that. They were using it. I think they were using it incorrectly because if we had set up Vault to generate these passwords, like it can do, which I'll show, then you don't need to store the DB passwords in there. The service will talk to Vault and say, I need a MySQL DB password. Vault will do its thing. The service will get it back, and if it needs to renew it, the service needs to renew it, it can renew it or get it again or do whatever. Did I apply that CRD? No, I did not. Should have done that. It would be done by now. Oops. So since it's using S3 as the backend, this will not be HA. There we go. The container, the pod in this case has a bank vault container that I didn't really look into what it does. So that's why it has 3 of 3. And you'll also notice it has 3 ready, which means it's unsealed. Oh, I'm already. Come on. So I got that. And we'll see that here. So you can set what I'm doing here with these environment variables, you can set the vault adder to be whatever your vault address is, and then the vault client will use that. Vault skip verify is, because these certificates are self-signed, we don't want it's telling the vault client, the CLI, to not verify the cert.
I assume there's a way to set a certificate to the operator?
Yeah. I haven't messed with it because one of the things I wanted to do was demonstrate some of the PKI stuff it can do, but I didn't get around to that.
Oh, like make its own?
Yeah, it can make its own. Like what they suggest is not having it be its own CA, but having it. I can't remember what it's called. You get an intermediate cert from your CA and put that one on Vault, and then it can generate certs with that. And then if something goes wrong, you can just get rid of the intermediate cert, and then your whole thing isn't compromised. So one thing you'll notice here, Shamir, which is what we did before, but we did not have to unseal it by hand. HA enabled is false because the S3 backend is false, and we didn't configure it to be HA. Or sorry, S3 backend doesn't do HA. One thing it does do with this particular operator is it stores it stores the root key in an encrypted S3 bucket, or an encrypted S3 bucket that is encrypted with the KMS key I gave it at the very beginning. So you need you need access to the KMS key to be able to decrypt it. If you're uncomfortable, some people might be uncomfortable with storing something in S3 like that. But perfectly fine to be uncomfortable. The new version of Vault with auto unseal can do all this for you. Can unseal automatically, and you don't have to worry about it. So what this is here, this is the root key. That is stored in S3. So the first thing I'll do is I'll log in. Okay, so I'm logged in as root there. The next thing, let's see if it'll.
So when people were asking for the auto unseal to be put in the open source version, was that because I have no idea if you know it, but was that because of the convenience or because people were locking themselves out frequently?
I'm not quite sure why. For me, it was for the convenience.
I mean, yeah, I just saw there we didn't have to run that command 3 times.
Yeah. And it's I think it's probably more secure than having those keys laying out there with someone. People may disagree, but I trust AWS and Google and Alibaba. Well, maybe not Alibaba, but Azure to keep these keys more secure than us.
Yeah.
Because but it's still a lot of it's the convenience. Like if we had done it properly at the previous client before auto unseal, every time we needed to unseal it or update, because that's part of the if you need to update it, when you start it up again, you need to unseal it. We would have had to get 3 people together and get their keys. So see if it lets me through. So these are some. We're going to log in with the root token here, but there you can, if you want to configure like a username and password, you can do that. LDAP, Okta, GitHub. I don't think these are the only choices. I think there are more, but I've only done LDAP and token authentication. It will say my LastPass. Give you a tour. No. And it will say you're logged in with the root token. Don't do that. Let me make this bigger. No, it disappeared. But it'll give you a warning. You really shouldn't be logging in with the root token, you big dope. But we have to. We're just doing a demo, so that's what we'll do. This is just a quick how to write a secret. Just write. Secret is like the path that I'll show you, and then the name of the secret and the key and value. You can have, I'm pretty sure you can have multiple keys and values per secret. So that one was just foo bar I wrote, and in the secret right here, my secret, and then there it is. I can delete it from here. I could do this with curl if I wanted to. Can delete the secret. But one of the more interesting things it does, that's the not working part. I was trying to figure out today. The dynamic passwords, I'm going to show you this right here. This is going to get me, need to get the host name first. And actually, I may have screwed up. This may actually already be configured because I did this earlier in the day. and the S3 bucket is there, and it looks like there's a database already. Okay, click on it. We'll see what happens. Sorry, so this is, let me replace the host name. This is the long, complicated command. Let me enable it first. So one thing you have to do is, when Vault starts up, it only comes with two stores enabled. The secret store, which is at secret slash, and cubbyhole, which is a cubbyhole slash. If you need it to do anything else, like you can create another KB store, and name it something different, attach policies to it, so only certain people will access and that sort of thing. You have to enable it. In this case, we're enabling a database store, so I have to tell it to, I have to enable it first. So it says it's already there because I did that earlier in the day. Whoops. So it's already there at database. Let me see if this works. So this may or may not exist already. Or actually what I can do, let's see what happens. And this command right here, I'm just calling it, setting a config and calling it my MySQL database. You give it a plugin name, so Postgres would be Postgres database plugin, Cache-based whatever. Connection URL, which is whatever the connection URL is. Allowed roles, MySQL role. And in this case, the username is the root or the admin username and password for the database. So it can, or more accurately, it's a username that has access to create users. It doesn't have to be the root one. Vault itself only needs to be able to create and delete users. Doesn't need to do anything else. So in a production manner, in a production role, I would probably create just one. MySQL user can only do those two things and give Vault that access. So that. See if it's there. There's the warning for the root password. Okay, so it's not actually showing me anything. Let's see. So we can view the config here. Type, path, that sort of thing. It's not something you would really mess around with that much, just to view it. This creates the role here. This is what's actually doing most of the work. The first thing basically said, here's how I connect to MySQL, and this one is, and this right here is how do I create a user. If you see the command here, it's create username identified by blah blah blah, grant select, etc., etc. And you could of course change this role to say only grant permissions to certain databases. You could restrict it that way, or however you like. You know, we're just all friends and family here, and we don't need to worry about people hacking us. So what happens now is this command reads from that role, and when it reads from that role, it will create a username and password in MySQL. And it'll give us the username and password right here. Sorry, down here. And you'll see the lease on it is 5 minutes, so I kind of have to hurry up a little bit so you can see it, see what happens. I'm going to pod. I know how to do this by then we give it the username and password that's here. If the Kubernetes pod authentication was working, you wouldn't have to do that initial read. You could do that initial read step on the container, and it would get its information if I had set it. Excuse me, if I had set it up correctly.
James, I think you're missing a space after the dash P.
You think so, huh?
Yeah, you don't
Yeah,
have space.
gets me all the time.
I don't know why, but
Yeah, you're correct in like every other one, but this one
Interesting.
you're not. It's weird. I don't.
I think Postgres does it too. Oh, you don't need any Postgres. You can have the space. And you don't have to define it in Postgres.
So basically,
I don't think I followed how the password was set. I think I might have missed that.
okay.
So like how did he get put into the MySQL pod?
So this command right here, the vault read database, it might be somewhat confusing because it is actually writing something. It is a read to you. When that command is run, it says, "Oh, I need to create." Vault says, "I need to create a username and password for this read for this particular person."
Yeah, and that's the create statement, creation statement. Yeah.
Oh, this statement before this part up here, that is just that's basically creating a role that says if someone reads from this role, use this creation statement to create a user and give it its access, whatever access information. You know, the
Okay.
you could use like in the grant statement, you can put db.table or db.star or whatever it is you want to limit. So for that role, only has access to MySQL.star, the MySQL tables, something like that.
Yeah. And yeah, it just clicked for me that you're running a MySQL shell, but you're just doing a client there.
Yep.
Yeah. But,
So right now you'll see 4, and when it hits 5 minutes, and that's the TTL I gave. Where's the password in here? Is that man? It's this one right here. It's the last one. v-root-mysql-role. So v, I guess, is vault. Not quite sure what root is. MySQL role is the role, and then just some random string that it generates. Eventually, you will see. After the 5 minutes are up, Vault will say, "Oh, the 5 minutes are up," and I delete the user. I honestly don't know what happens if you create one, like we have now, and if Vault were to die. Whether it would actually go delete it if we brought it back up.
If you have a container reading that username password, does Vault re-inject a new user every 5 minutes, or will that container break after 5 minutes?
The container would have to like re-up the lease. There's a way to do it. I don't have it in here, but there's a way to Vault to say, extend the TTL for 5 more minutes. It can only, I think the default max it could go is 768 hours, I think. So you can't renew beyond that. Ideally, what you would do is, the operator would say, okay, let's extend these leases out more. I haven't really run into the problem. I know there's a way to do it, but I haven't really run into an issue like that. But it'll disappear eventually. There we go. So, and Vault just deleted it. So, even though I'm still on here, I exit out and get access denied. Try and use that same username and password again. And I think that is pretty much it for the demo, which means it's pretty much it for the talk, unless you want to.
I'm curious how far you got with the encrypting a Kubernetes secret, or storing a secret part you said that's not working now?
The part that's not working is like Kubernetes. Let me show you. I mean, I can show you the basics of how it's done. I have an issue. I've got a permissions issue basically that I found like a half an hour before, so I wasn't able to figure it out. So when you in a Kubernetes cluster, you can get each container really, I believe, has this file, has a token associated with it. Kubernetes there's some sort of, I believe, it's the same with the EC2 instances, there's some sort of public key talking back and forth. I'm not really sure how it works. I've seen the flow diagram 1,000 times and I can never remember exactly how it works. But basically there's a way that Kubernetes knows. Vault can talk to the Kubernetes API and back and forth, and Vault says, here's the token I have. And Kubernetes can verify that yes, this is a Kubernetes container. It is in this cluster. You know, it's not some random VM out on the internet that's trying to talk to us. Sort of like how it does with AWS. In this command here, this is where I was going to show the curls, but it didn't work. So you get the kube token, and then set it as a jot when you do this curl command, this request, to the login endpoint. And what it's supposed to return, it'll return some JSON that has a vault token in there, which looks somewhat like this, right here. Don't know exactly what it's going to be, but for the vaults, if you want to use the Vault CLI or the REST API, which is what some people would be that you can set. I think based on labels, maybe. I'm not really sure if I can get it working, but it basically uses that Vault token that it got from the login command to get whatever it needs, do whatever it needs with Vault. And there's a way to extend the lease and do things like that for the token. And so that's basically how it works. In theory, if I had gotten this working, we could have used that for the MySQL stuff as well. And the container would have just had this access. I wouldn't have had to like do it on my laptop here after a login. So
I guess from what I understand, the app pod is going to have to talk to Vault directly. There's nothing in Kubernetes that's going to talk to Vault and trade secrets there.
correct. The container or the application or however you want to do it would have to talk to Vault. There is a Vault agent binary which is separate, and the Vault agent can handle all of this stuff. So you would just set your application to talk to the Vault agent, like a sidecar or something like, or however you wanted to do it. The application would talk to Vault agent would authenticate, do what it needs to, and stuff like that. So you wouldn't have to do anything. You wouldn't have to do this section in your application. You just talk to the agent, and the agent does it. The agent can also cache stuff if you want it to. So yeah, it's pretty flexible. There's lots of ways you can do it.
Our version of Kubernetes is a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
OpenShift is what we use. And the secrets are still base 64 encoded.
Yeah.
So, I guess there's nothing Vault could do to help with the Kubernetes secrets. You still have to call Vault for it.
Yeah, you still have to call Vault for that. We're sort of running into that with the product we're working on. It's an OpenShift, but they did all their secrets as Kubernetes secrets, and there are some secrets. There's some actual secrets in there that I'm like, not really sure. You guys should be storing this stuff here. And then there's all the additional stuff that Vault can do that might be useful to you. So let me finish destroying everything. I am open to questions, of course. Sorry, go.
I'm just wondering, is the, I don't know the best way to phrase this, but is the best way to configure these secrets in here, I guess manually, because I was like also looking at a package called sealed secrets for Kubernetes,
Okay.
and basically lets you actually, it encrypts your secrets to where you can actually check them into Git, and it can only be decrypted on the server.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really nice from like a development perspective. I can just source control a version, do all this stuff with my secrets.
Yeah.
I'm wondering from like CI/CD perspective, do I have to like actually either curl or go to the UI or create these secrets in here manually before I deploy out my applications, or is there kind of like a more automated way to like configure that stuff?
You could automate it. I'm not familiar with that tool you mentioned, but I think there's a way. Actually, I'm not going to say I think there's a way because I'm not sure. Most of the secrets, like I said, for the client we did it for, they were just config information, and there was I think it was just like a JSON file per. It was configuration for the app, so it wasn't really that important. It wasn't really that secret. Why are you using Vault for that? We can just use console or etcd, but anyway. So yes, in a sense, for certain things like that Vault cannot dynamically generate, like the database passwords or something like that, the database username and password, you'd have to get them in there some way, and I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately, right now. I mean, you could, thinking on the fly, you could, I think we did sort of think about this, like have a pre-commit hook or something into Git that would encrypt certain files, maybe, but we haven't really had to deal with it. You know, I'm sure if you could if you talk to HashiCorp, they'll be like, oh yeah, do this, that, and then boom, you're done.
Yeah.
So, any other questions? I'm just going to go destroy everything.
You don't want to bill for $700 later?
Considering I'm the guy that had to clean out the mess a couple weeks ago because we were going over budget, no, I do not. It's actually just it's a one master, two node cluster for the lease. It's like our.
Are you the reason we had to clean it up so you could budget this?
No, I'm not the reason. There was one cluster in there that was mine, actually two, but
I think you had like 3 EKS stuff.
yeah, you did, and I yelled at you guys. So the Vault stuff is over now. We're done. But we have a bunch of Terraform modules. We've written a bunch of Terraform modules that do a bunch of things. One of them creates a COPS compliant cluster, and that's what I use right there. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Why do you guys choose cops over EKS?
We
Warehouse, which is kind of weird. Normally it's in like office space, but here in Denver we went to the warehouse and hell.
I was in their distro
It's in
center
the
down
distro,
south.
And so we had to go through there and they had little room stuff. While I was there, they were talking about, some of the limitations with it, like, how many master nodes you can hold is kind of limited because you can't, vertically scale it. And so there's some limitations, and so they were like, for production use, and this was, I don't think official Amazon stance, but all the traders were like, we wouldn't use EKS in production because it's not ready to handle millions of users.
Yeah.
So they still recommended COPS for now, and at that time they still didn't know how they were going to handle upgrades because they hadn't done a single upgrade of EKS, of the Kubernetes underlying.
Yeah.
There's some big concerns there. Now the change might be different, but at least as of 6 months ago, everyone I talked to at Amazon said, like, if you're going to go to production, do COPS. Start learning EKS now.
Yeah.
But, so.
Yeah, we use The EKS masters are T2 mediums, and you can have 3 of them. Cops, you can set the masters to whatever size you want, and you can have however many, just as long as they're an odd number. Just for, I was messing around. I was like, I wonder what happens if you tell it to create 2. I said, no, can't do that.
That's nice.
So EKS, I think the limit is about, is it 500 worker nodes?
Yeah, it was something kind of low.
Something like that. And then the pods are limited because of the CNI. Because of the CNI, the pods are limited based on like how many
That's what
IP addresses you
WordPress
can.
were limited to because of internal IP spaces at Amazon.
Yeah, and they're limited to based on the node type, how many ENIs it can have on it. Like, because each pod maps to an actual IP in your VPC. If the traffic is small enough, I'd be perfectly. I mean, I have no problem using EKS. But the real reason we did this COPS module is because at the time we wanted developers to be able to create their own small COPS cluster and mess around with it and then blow it away at the end. Be able to blow it away at the end and not have to step on anything else. And then the budgetary overlords came by and said, "You're spending too much money." So we're all just going to give them a namespace and an EKS cluster whenever they want it, and we'll see how that works out. But yeah, I'm somewhat slightly concerned that you can't vertically scale EKS. You can't, and you can do upgrades now. They're up to 1.11.
Yeah, so they solved that, and I think they're working on solving being able to vertically scale as well.
Yeah.
I don't know when that's coming out, but my understanding is it's coming down the line. So you could say like, I want a 62, CPU server for one of my masters. But it was inside of AWS and in their data centers, and they're out of. It starts always in New York. They're physically limited on hardware, right? Like you think Amazon's not infinitely scalable. There's actual limits, and so when they start up new projects, you're more limited, right? Because they don't have enough racks to
Yeah.
guarantee availability.
It's weird to think Amazon is limited.
Right.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
The cloud is just someone else's data center, which is why I love it, because I don't want to get pager alerts at 3 a.m. if the humidity is too high. But at the same time, yeah, still servers, physical space is required.
Yeah.
If you're actually curious as to what they're doing, they've published a roadmap publicly. If you just search for AWS Containers Roadmap, it'll send you to GitHub, and then there's a link in there. So this is the just shipped stuff. I actually haven't looked at this in a while. 1.11.8, 1.12. Oh, that's new. I know one of our previous coworkers had been talking to them, and ideally they would. And this is a problem with COPS as well. COPS still hasn't, at least last time I checked, they haven't gotten to 1.12 yet. They're still behind. I didn't know that at the time. I also didn't know that at the time I was doing the COPS module. But EKS is sort of limited in the same way. There's only like up to 1.12 now, and we're up to 1.14?
I think 1.14 just got released.
Yeah. But I did hear that some of the EKS guys at Amazon were just like, we would like to be able to support it, support the new version within like a week of it coming out or a month of it coming out, which would be nice. But yeah, I'm just going to read through this. Kind of curious as to what's come. Relative to the client you're working on, when we started talking to them, the one you will soon not be working on.
Okay.
When we did did something for them, and EKS wasn't everywhere, so there were a lot of regions EKS wasn't in at the time. So we were like, we're not sure if you want to use EKS or not. But now they're pretty much in all the regions. Maybe not Brazil. I have to check on that one.
So what is Amazon's overall view of Kubernetes itself? Do
I think they realized Google was going to eat their lunch.
Yeah.
And they had to. Kubernetes is the second largest open source project by monthly commits, only behind Linux, which is huge.
Yeah.
So there's a certain tipping point where I think they saw that, and they're like, we
Nomad.
Nomad, and then there was Netflix had one, right?
Netflix had Titus.
Titus. I think all of them were
Yeah.
working at the same time, but Kubernetes, based on how much money Google threw at it to all the developers, became the behemoth that everyone's like, why am I making this when this is the second largest open source project in history? So,
People still Nomad is in heavy use.
well, so it's like
but
Pivotal
Titus-
Cloud and all these, but
Titus is like no one uses that.
right.
Yeah.
Well, whenever Netflix open source something, that means it's dead.
That was the same with OpenShift too. That it was an attempt to do container things and didn't use Kubernetes. OpenShift 3, we scrapped all the stuff into and
Yeah.
based on Kubernetes.
And Pivotal has PKS now.
Even the newest Internet Explorer is actually not Chrome, finally.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I saw that. It's just Chromium.
Yeah.
It's like they finally just gave up.
Yeah. I have opinions about that. Nomad might be better for certain workloads, but Kubernetes, in terms of features, Kubernetes definitely has, in my opinion, has the features.
So it's kind of like CouchDB and a few of my like SQLite. They have like niche things you should probably use it for, but otherwise you should probably use Mongo, right? That you should use or
Yeah.
SQL, right?
I totally forgot I had a drink. Well, yeah. What did I do with the presentation?
Gone through.
Go on.
I guess
Yep.
the question going back to Vault is, it's got the rotating token stuff, but what would a user have to, let's say something got leaked, or you have a user that left the company or something like that. How would a malicious user be able to, if you left back doors open or something like that, how would a user be able to get into the vault or do some damage or something like that?
If they got someone got fired, say,
Yeah.
and you didn't have the proper procedures for, making sure all their access was removed. If you misconfigured your security groups and they could talk to, like, we do most of our stuff in AWS, so I'm talking in AWS land. And you misconfigure your security groups and, the load balancer for Vault is accessible to the world, they could go home and log in that way.
The number one I see is, right, a developer adds their IP and it says /32. You don't know whose that is.
Yeah.
AWS just recently added the ability to comment. So you're not gonna feel confident knowing that was Joe that just quit. That's his home IP address, right? So
Yeah.
that's the number one misconfiguration I've seen. You got all these /32s. Who are these?
But if that IP address is public, don't they still need their user account to have access?
Yeah, if they still had their user account, they could get in. But like some of the the procedure, I guess, for this one would be, and I know you walked in a little late, so I don't know if you got the seal it or unseal it or just access talk. You can go in. There's sort of like a hierarchy of rules. Like there's the main policy, which everything inherits from, has a TTL set to this. It's a very basic policy. And then you create other policies that inherit from that one. They say, okay, but the max TTL can only be 2 hours or whatever. And with a user, say, if the user's logging in via LDAP, you have to disable their LDAP account. Or if it's a username and password, which you can do in here, which is not with Vault, it's not really the suggested way of doing it. You'd have to go into Vault and delete it. Okta or GitHub are the same way. You'd have to remove access that way.
So another thing I think to think about, I think, so 70% of all your attacks are gonna happen from within, right? So it'll be an end user. And then I think there's this thing we like to think in our head, is that they left the back door, or they did something we could find. But in reality, they could just have knowledge. They could have, if you have hundreds of apps, they might have knowledge of the service account and its password that they just can't forget. And you don't know that they know that. So it's how do people get in? Is because secrets aren't rotated enough. People have access to secrets that they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And so that's the number one thing I think just to answer your part of, how would someone get access? It's not necessarily this clear back door that's like obvious, right? Like there's
Yeah.
so many service accounts, so.
Well, that's kind of what I was asking. It's like, you
Okay.
know, they go through all
Thank you, Russell.
they go through all of this effort to like make this like, you know, rotate the secrets, so you have like rotating database credentials and everything like that. I would just hate to like make a stupid mistake and like leave something in there that's like, oh, I completely forgot they can do this.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Not giving it the root would be the key, I think, for this, and then just rotate properly. Most people don't rotate properly, or they don't. There's a few others, right? Like someone could get fired and you don't even know about that till a week later. Like, oh man, like right? So
yeah.
the perfect
that's-
world doesn't exist, and that's how big data leaks happen internally, intentionally.
Yeah.
And ideally, if they're out at home, they don't do what Russell said they did, and added their home IP to the security group.
Yeah.
Because I hate it when they do that. What did you say yesterday? It used to be 75% of problems used to be something, but now 75%.
75% of the problems used to be the physical layer of the network, and now 75% of your problems are the security group layer
Yeah.
in the cloud.
That's something that there's another product that HashiCorp has called Sentinel, which is a policy enforcer.
Okay.
That's something that would cover, like checking, I think, or cloud custodian is another one. You would write rules to say no load balancer should have 0.0.0 on them, or something
For
like that.
/32s, we have 3 offices. I know those IP addresses, so those are allowed.
Yeah.
Which I might not know looking at it.
Yeah.
Anything that's not one of those is not allowed.
Or like, I believe you could say, if there's no comment on it about what it actually is, then it's
That long to add comments to security.
flagged as invalid, or sets up a warning and says, hey, there's an undescribed rule here. We don't know what it is. You should probably take a look at it. And you can do a bunch of other things to limit. You can limit access to the actual whole account by IP with IAM roles and stuff like that.
You could also put this ideal, I think, vault would sit in a VPC that was internal only and secured with VPC ACLs as well. So a security group, if someone had ability to edit a security group, but you would not give them ability to edit a VPC ACL, that would not allow them to route internally. Right?
Yeah, they would have to basically hack 2 things.
Multi-layer, or multi-layer security.
I keep forgetting about ACLs because we never use them. I tried to use them once and it was just too complicated for a public facing
Terraforming's a
ACL.
little bit better, but people see infrastructure as code, they wanna just get this giant sprawl automatically, it's a nightmare.
So, any other questions? Thoughts, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can see almost all of our Denver Code Talks on YouTube. We need 300 likes to get /tag Kinson, so feel free to drop the likes, smash that subscribe button.